Hi, it's Holly back again with another episode of this podcast. Well done if you've come this far through the week with us. Keep going, we're almost there. It's going really well, so we're really glad to have you with us again. This episode is called Let's Talk Coronavirus. Where is God in the pandemic? We're interviewing Giles Cattermole, who's the London team leader for the Universities and Colleges Christian Fellowship, a Christian organisation that supports Christian unions all over the UK. Giles also works as a consultant in emergency medicine at King's College Hospital NHS Foundation Trust and does a bit of medical research and teaching trauma courses as well. So it's a real privilege to have him with us today. It's going to be a good one, so please do keep listening. If you do have any questions, please do be in touch with us and do let us know. But let's just jump into it.
Hi, my name's Hannah and I'm a fourth year pharmacy student from Bath University.
And I'm Josh. I'm a second year sport management and coaching student, also at Bath University.
Welcome to our event, Let's Talk Coronavirus, Where is God in the Pandemic? We are joined by Giles here, and do you mind just telling us a bit about yourself and what you do for work?
Yeah, thanks, Hannah, Josh. My name is Giles Cattermole. Married to Victoria, got 4 kids. The eldest is a student in Newcastle University at the moment, and the other 3 are at home with us. I work for our local hospital as an A&E consultant, accident and emergency, and I also have, so I do that part-time, and I also work helping university students know more about Jesus. That's my other part-time job.
Nice.
Great. So the seminar's focused on coronavirus, so I guess we'll focus in more on the A&E kind of side of things. So how are things at the minute on the front line?
Well, I'm sure you've seen the sort of the numbers in the news. I don't know if you're like me and you're obsessed and watching those graphs every day, but it really is coming down. So the numbers being admitted to the hospital now are pretty small of people with COVID. There are still a reasonable number who are still in hospital and still in ICU, but again, those numbers have come down hugely since the peak in January. So it's all going in the right direction, which is a real answer to prayer, and it continues.
Yeah, definitely. As you've said, like, it's great to hear the numbers coming down, but it's not always been like that. How have you and your colleagues coped in the middle of the the peak of the pandemic? How have you coped, like, seeing intense suffering every day?
So it was at its peak. I think the first peak was perhaps the scariest one back in sort of April, because we didn't know what was going on, and patients were scared. People weren't coming into hospital for other things, so the numbers of people coming was right down. So we know, and we're going to reap the consequences of that. We're going to see more people coming in with cancer, heart disease, and so on. But way back then, in terms of COVID, we weren't sure what we were meant to wear in terms of PPE. We weren't sure what we were meant to do in terms of treatment. It was quite scary. You know, people were dressing up in all this sort of spaceman kit and going into a zone of the department. So we separated off into red and blue zones. Red was COVID, blue was not COVID, which was all wrong anyway, because lots of people didn't have symptoms but did have COVID. And there were people going to the red zone who were just vulnerable, didn't have COVID, probably caught it there. It was all very alarming, and these red zones are all like sealed off, and it actually was literally dark, and you were sort of having to put on all this stuff, which made you difficult to hear people, and it just felt like a war zone. And you'd be walking around the hospital, and the corridors were deserted, the car parks were empty. I mean, amazing. That was really, in some ways, that was hard. So we were all doing extra shifts. We had consultants like myself doing night shifts, which we didn't normally do in our hospital. Junior doctors were doing more hours, nurses were doing more shifts. And in A&E, it wasn't as bad as it was in ICU. The ICU guys were working, I think, even longer shifts, more shifts. And of course, they had they were completely overfull. and spreading intensive care beds into other wards. People were having to redeploy from other specialties, nurses and doctors. And that's really hard, because the ICU guys were seeing the people dying. Occasionally we get people dying in the emergency department. So very frail, maybe lots of other illnesses, very elderly, who'd already not come into hospital some days and would come in at the end. And that's always hard. In a sense that is something that we are used to seeing people coming in at the end stage. But I think for intensive care and for those on the wards where so many people with this same disease were dying, that I think was very hard. Come the second wave, although the total numbers were higher, I think we were more ready for it. Kind of got a grip with what we needed to wear, how we needed to process people. We had more treatments, so stuff worked a bit better. And it's still been really hard in terms of people's hours. And, a lot of my colleagues have found that. But I think the second wave, in some ways, it was more manageable despite the increased numbers. Sorry, now I've forgotten what the original question was. I think I've probably answered it and gone on too long.
No, that was great. Yeah, no, you definitely answered it. We were just talking about how you and your colleagues have found it, and kind of how you found facing that suffering every day while we kind of were at home and a bit shielded from it. But yeah, that was good. Thank you.
So, what is it like being a doctor in the NHS while having a faith? I think a lot of people kind of have the argument that science, the doctor and the science side of it, is very kind of opposed to faith. So how do those two work together, and what's it like being a doctor in the NHS with faith, particularly at this time?
Yeah, good question, Josh. I think people probably overstate that dichotomy between people who are scientists and people who have faith. I think medicine and nursing actually attract a lot of people who are people of Christian faith and other faiths. So lots of my colleagues in the department would be Muslims, a couple of Hindus, and within our nursing staff, an awful lot are Christians. So I don't think there's I don't think there's any sort of sense among my colleagues that it's odd to have faith and be a doctor or a nurse, or indeed any other healthcare profession. Does that mean there aren't sometimes, some conflicts that people struggle with being a Christian at work, or are there some ways in which it gives us a unique perspective? Yeah, I'm sure there are. So I think sometimes some people can be concerned that Christians might abuse their position. You've got vulnerable patients come in, especially in an emergency department, at extremes of, or sometimes extremes of life, but in very stressful, acute situations where some people say, "Oh, well, it's inappropriate to express your faith." I haven't found that kind of situation myself. I found some patients or relatives, particularly, will often, express that they themselves would love to talk to someone who has faith, would maybe want to pray with someone. And the sadness is that actually in A&E we're often so busy that's really difficult, and that's often easier in somewhere like a palliative care setting or a primary care setting with a GP. But I think if the patient is saying, "I'm really scared," or the relatives are saying, I think grandma's going to die, and she was a Christian or whatever religion, we'd love for someone to talk to her about that, bring in their priest or their imam, or whatever. I think a lot of people are actually quite open to wanting to talk about stuff like that. So I haven't found that as being a problem. I think where positively having a faith helps us see helps us put things in a different perspective. So as a Christian, I think we're all made in God's image. It's a sort of strange sort of theological idea, but one of the things it means is that we're all valuable simply because we're human beings. Whether you are profoundly learning disabled, whether you are at the end of your life, whether you are, a young person who just sprained their ankle, whichever of those three you are equally valuable. Even though society often might not think that. Who does society might think it's the one who's got the job, paying the most tax, looking after their family. But I find it really helpful knowing that actually every one of those people has been made by God and is valuable. And that helps me see that I've got to treat this person as I would myself or my own parents or any patient. I think being made in the image of God also, it reminds us that there's something spiritual about us as well. Not just that we're equally valuable, but actually it's that we're not just physical beings. There's something more than just the physiology, biochemistry, and all that sort of stuff that we studied at medical school. We're built for relationship with God, and part of that is that God's put eternity in our hearts. Is something the Bible says, that there is something in all of us that yearns for that spiritual relationship with God, and people seek that in all sorts of ways. They might seek that in other religions. I'm convinced that we find that met in the person of Jesus Christ, and that yearning, that spirituality about us all helps me remember that not just that the patient themselves is spiritual, whether they know it or not, but actually that death is not the end. And so if I'm going into work and I'm just thinking, it's just about the illness of this sort of mess of blood and bone and whatever, and then they might die, and it's temporarily sad. But actually, I know that there's something after that, and that all of us are going to face God. And for those who know Jesus, death is therefore actually, although it can be sad, it can be painful, it can be a horrible thing to go through, but there is real hope after it. And that also affects the way that I see my work. So I think that's seeing us as made in God's image with that potential for relationship with God forever changes the way I see patients and see disease. And it therefore changes the way I see why I'm working. I'm not just working for the hospital, I'm working for God. Sorry, another long answer.
No, thank you for that. That was great. The hope you talk about that you have from knowing Jesus, do you think that helps you deal with the pandemic differently to maybe how some of your colleagues without faith dealt and faced it?
Yeah. So don't get me wrong. I think, partly I'm part-time. So my full-time colleagues are working a lot harder than I am. And even if I were full-time, I think many of my colleagues who don't share my faith are much better doctors than I am, can often be much kinder than I am. I can be short-tempered, I can be stressed and tired. So I don't think being a Christian makes you a better doctor in terms of how we do our medicine, or a nurse, and how you do nursing. I think it gives us a different perspective. And so in terms of the pandemic, I think I would see those different perspectives about knowing that I'm working for God, knowing that it's God who gives me my ultimate purpose and value, and that I can rest in Him, is different from my colleagues who don't find their rest and their purpose in that. And so if, for example, and I'm not saying this is true of any particular colleague, but if someone were to find their purpose and their value in their job in successfully treating patients, for example, which would be a perfectly reasonable thing for people to do, just as a bridge builder would find purpose and satisfaction in building bridges that don't fall down. But if that is where you find that value and satisfaction, and then everyone's dying, that is really shattering, because what is there beyond that? Because no, I don't think any of my colleagues are doing this for the money, even though doctors are pretty well paid, and certainly none of my nursing colleagues are doing it for the money. But I do think there is a big difference if you're doing it for the here and now, for the physical illness, the physical patient in front of you. That must be a real challenge when it all goes pear-shaped and vastly more patients come in that you can look after in the way that you'd like to, and when they die, that's hard to deal with. And so, I mean, one of the things the hospital's done is put on all sort of lots of well-being stuff, and so a lot of people are using that, whether that's yoga or debriefing sessions, and some of my colleagues find that helpful. But I think it's almost like a sticking plaster on the real problem. That is that we're not actually just about the here and now, the physical. There's something more to it, and that's where I think, as a Christian, I know God has got this. It looks a mess to me, and I'm failing to do what I would like to do. But I know that there's a bigger reality behind that. Awesome.
You talk positively about your experience with that pandemic quite well, but it must have been hard going through pandemic and seeing the suffering. And was there ever a time, or is there ever sometimes a time where you feel that God's not present in the middle of everything that's going on? A time where you ever doubt God?
Yeah, thank you, Josh. So I think the way you've asked the question, probably yes. In that, is there ever a time I feel like that? Yeah. I think I probably often feel like that, and it's not just the pandemic. I mean, lots of things that I get stressed and I get tired, and I think, and I forget that God is there, and so I feel like He isn't. But when I stop and I think about it, and I remember, I know He's there, even though I might not feel it at the time. And I think if we as Christians pretend that we always feel in a great place, we're probably deluding ourselves. And the Bible is full of people of godly people, who in the midst of suffering will shout out to God why. I don't think that is a wrong thing to do. Now, we need to process it. We need to think it through. But I think that engaging with something dreadful that's happening, whether it's a patient that's dying in front of you or just whatever it is, and this is true for anyone, not to about just doctors and nurses in COVID. It's whatever awful thing might happen to you. In some ways, I think if we don't say to God, why is this? What is going on? I just feel you're not here. Why did you let that happen? I wonder whether that betrays a lack of something about us. And even just asking that question, why, actually shows that we are taking seriously the reality of God and His love for us. Because, if I didn't care, I wouldn't say why. It's a meaningless question. If there is no God, it's a meaningless question. If we are just atoms, it's bouncing around by chance, that the idea, that the question of purpose is meaningless. So there's no point asking why to the universe. It only makes sense to ask why, to feel God's absence, if there is actually a God. Does that make sense? And so then I need to, I guess, if I've got time to give you a slightly longer answer.
Yeah, go for it.
We want to know where is God now? Why is God not here now in our suffering? Why is he not doing something about it now? And that's the question we ask. And I think it does betray the thought that, either God doesn't care, or that he can't do anything about it. Either that he's heartless or that he's helpless. And I look at the stories of Jesus in the Bible, and I see how he engages with people and he comes to them in their moment of need. There's a great story about a widow whose son dies. She's got nothing in the world. She, in that culture, would be like at the bottom of the pile, and now she's lost her husband already. Now she's lost her son, and it's utterly terrible. And he's probably maybe a teenager. Doesn't say exactly how old he is. And Jesus comes and says his heart goes out to her, and there she is in her suffering, and Jesus is there, has compassion on her. And he says to her, "Don't cry." And you think at this point, you're going, well, isn't that a bit like a Christian saying to us, something happens and someone comes along, they put their hand on your shoulder and they go, there, God's in charge, don't cry. And you think, come on, that is just glib and it's a bit condescending, it's useless. But then Jesus says to her, or rather says to the boy, the dead boy, he says, get up. And he gets up. And so you see that Jesus isn't just condescending, pseudo-compassion. His compassion actually works. He does something about it. The boy gets up and the people look around and they go, God has come to help his people. And they're absolutely right. He has come to help his people. But again, you see, someone will say, well, okay, that's fine. So there's this bloke Jesus in some story in some old book who came along and, even if it's true, but he only helped that person. How does he help me in my need? And I think that clue there is that people said God has come to help his people, because just a couple of years later, Jesus himself dies. I mean, he's murdered, he's crucified on the cross. And Jesus himself, God himself, he's on the cross. And I said, how people in the Bible say, why? And Jesus shouts out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Even Jesus, and you think, where was God? And the answer was that God was doing the most amazing thing. And that when Jesus died on the cross, he was defeating death. He rose again. He finished it. He got rid of not just that sickness of that boy, not just his own death. He actually dealt with the cause of death. So it's not that Jesus. So as Christians, we believe in a God who's actually come down and felt our suffering. He died on the cross. He knew what it was like to be betrayed, to be beaten, to suffer ridicule, and to die horribly. But he didn't do that just so that we can say, oh, we've got a God who's been there as well. And that's good. That is great. Christianity is the only religion that can say that. We can say, no, when we're suffering, we know we have a God who has been there and has suffered. He knows what it's like, and so he can comfort us. But he didn't just stay, because if he just stayed there, it's like, again, it's nice of you there. So what? The point is, he actually dealt with the cause of the suffering. He actually defeated it. What the Bible calls sin, our rebellion against God. That's the cause of all our suffering. It's the cause of sin. It's death. Ultimately, the whole world is messed up because of it. But he deals with it. And he offers that hope to us now. So you said earlier about what's the hope? That's the hope. The hope is that the Jesus who came and suffered and knows what suffering is like because he's been there. He's actually defeated it, and he offers us that new life. That's the hope. We just need to trust that he's done it for us and follow him. So do I feel sometimes that God isn't there? Yeah. Do I have examples of people in the Bible who shouted out, God, where are you? Yeah, I do, because I feel like that. But when I've asked that question, why, I may not get the answer. I may not understand the answer. But when I ask the question, where are you? I see that we have a God who has been there and who has done something about it, and who will see me through whatever suffering I'm going through now to the end and to an eternity with him, which is what we were built for. Yeah.
That's great. Is there anything else you'd like to say to people listening? A lot of them won't know Jesus. Yeah, whether you have anything to say to them.
Yeah, thanks. I think so. If you've not heard this before and it's all new to you, that would just, what I've just said will sound completely mental. It's like, that is, what is that all about? That just makes no sense. But what I would just ask you then, but if it's true, if there's even a glimmer of truth in that, it is really important. And so what I'd urge you to do is just find out more. And I think see at Bath you're doing an Alpha course soon. I get hooked into that. Talk to your friends. I think you're going to be told more about how that's going to happen. But don't let it lie. Is basically what I'm saying. Don't just brush it off and go, yeah, just another religion. If this is true, it is the single most important thing you're ever going to do. So my plea would be, follow Jesus. But because I appreciate that, it may all be a bit new and a bit weird. My plea would be just find out more about him. Because if he is who he says he is, if he did rise from death, you've got to know.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed that interview. And thank you for all the work you and your colleagues have been doing over this past year as well. Yeah, that was great. Thank you very much, Giles.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you so much. Back with me again on the screen, lucky you. We still have one more event tonight. So if anything, please come along to it. It's going to be great. It's going to be a general knowledge quiz and there will be prizes. So be there or don't have a chance of prizes. So definitely be there. It's going to be called Let's Talk Jesus. Does God Really Care About Me? We're going to have Tom come and speak to us, who's a graduate from the University of Bath. And he's going to chat about that question. So hopefully we'll see you all there at 7:30 p.m. this evening. And do be in touch with us if you have any other questions. Keep an eye out on our social medias or on our website and with what's going to be going on. We would love to talk more with you and listen to what you have to say on these topics. Please do contact us if you'd like to chat more, meet any of us, or read the Bible with a member from Christian Union. We also have a follow-up course called Alpha, where you can sit and discuss big topics of life with other students from Bath. So please do let us know if you'd be interested in that and want to get involved. I've personally done it a couple of times and it's been great just to hear different people's perspectives on what they think on these topics. So you can head to our website, www.bathcu.org.uk, and then click on our March 21 Events Week page, and there's a follow-up form you can fill out there to find out more.